I'm Sabrina Aspenson, and today I'm going to be leading you through a virtual foray through the woods. Currently, I am in the Cooley Experimental Forest in Berry Mills, which is a DNR-owned land. It's a huge piece of property. I am currently a grad student at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, where I study Driftless mushrooms, from everything that's edible to non-edible, and all the species alike. I also was a president of the UWL Mycology Club, and I was a founding member, also served as treasurer, and everything like that. And I have led a multitude of different forays, done a bunch of public identification, and a lot of public talks about mushrooms that you find in the woods. So today I'm going to be leading you on a virtual foray. All ready to go in my mushroom gear. I have my boots on. These are hiking boots. I got my pants on, long socks. Right now in the springtime you want to be wearing pants, long socks, and shoes just because the amount of ticks that are in the woods. I use a chemical called permethrin, which you can just buy at Walmart. It's pretty cheap. You just kind of like soak all your clothes in it, and the ticks don't really like it, so that's what I use. You can also use bug spray that has DEET in it, and stuff like that, or homemade goods or whatever you use, but I definitely suggest using that. I have my coat on. I have a bunch of layers. I have a sweatshirt and a long sleeve shirt, just because when you're in the spring, you don't really know the weather, because we just had snow like a couple days ago, and then this week is supposed to be 60 degrees, so you just want to make sure you bring a bunch of layers and all that stuff. I also have a mushroom hunting bag. I use this. I bought it on Etsy for like $30. You don't have to do anything this fancy. You can also use like a canvas bag, like this. It's kind of dirty, but whatever. And then I have another littler one. You don't want to use plastic bags. So plastic bags mushrooms like decompose really fast in plastic bags, so I would just steer clear of those. If you don't have anything else, they work, but just make sure when you get them home to take them out of that bag right away so they don't decompose as fast. I also have littler bags to collect stuff in, so this is a bigger bag, but like these little bags here, I just reuse these from, I went and got liquor from the liquor store, and this is what they put these bags in. They put the liquor in this bag, so I just put this in here. So you can reuse a bunch of different stuff. So want a bigger bag to keep everything in, and then I also have a knife. This is good to just like cut down the meatier mushrooms. You want like a nice clean cut when you're picking mushrooms, just because you don't want to do all that cleaning at home. You can clean them like out in the woods as well, but we can talk about that later. It's also good to wear like a hat to put your hair up, just for purposes of bugs and ticks and stuff like that. Alright, so I also have a lot of different bags, because when you're collecting mushrooms, you want to make sure, well, depending on what you're hunting mushrooms for, so if you're collecting for edibility purposes, you want to be collecting different mushrooms in different bags. So if you put all the mushrooms into one bag, you could have edible species and non-edible species getting mixed together. So for example, oysters have like a little bit of a look-alike with the Crepidotus species, which is brown spored, versus oysters which are white spored, but for an amateur mycologist, sometimes those can be easily mistaken for each other, so you want to make sure that you're putting separate species into separate bags, so you're not cooking them all at one time when you think that they're all one species. So that's why I have a bunch of different bags. And if you're identifying mushrooms just for fun, you want to make sure again that they're not getting mixed together where spores are contaminating. You can get like different spore prints just because that you mix all those species into one bag. So that's why I have a bunch of different bags that are different sizes. So right now we're standing in a creek zone or riparian zone where a lot of low-lying, it's going to be a lot wetter here, so and also like tree types. So there's a lot of, this is like a dead elm behind me, which is a great thing to look for hunting morel mushrooms. This would be a great spot to look for mushrooms as well, just because it's a little wetter. Stays a little cooler during the summer times, just because of this creek that's running through here. Then the other habitat types, right, are like hillsides, which are really common in the Driftless region, which are usually covered with like oaks and hickory trees. Those hardwood forests are really great for hunting mushrooms as well. So if you're hunting just for identifying purposes, not for edibility, you can hunt different types of habitats and collect as much as you want, as many things as you want, just to go home to identify and work on your identification skills. Otherwise, if you're hunting just for edibility purposes, you want to focus on specific habitat types. So for morels, you want to focus on dead elms, which is characterized by these like trees that don't have any bark on them. So elms have the bark that like peels away when they're dead. So that's like a really common, not seeing any other dead elms, but a really common thing to look for with dead elm trees. If you're hunting for like oysters, chicken of the woods, hen of the woods, those are going to be commonly found on big oak trees, so that's what you're going to look for that type of specific habitat type for those edible species. And the first mushroom that everybody wants to hunt is morels. So the one thing that you want to look for morels, right, you want to hunt habitat, not just go out and like find stuff. And one of the things that you want to look for is dead elm trees. So we came across this dead elm, which is characterized by the loss of its bark, and the way that it loses it, it just like comes off. So just like slips off. This is a slipper, they call them, because the bark slips off. But this is also a 2-for-1, so this is a dead elm, but then there's also some mushroom mycelium on here that's just called the rhizomorphs. So some species of mushrooms actually create this mycelium mass that is like denser than most mycelium. It has like a dark coloration, and it grows up the sides of trees. You don't normally see it, right, because bark is covering it, but in the cases of elm trees, you can see it because the bark falls off very easily. Alright, so we've come across a really big oak tree. So these are a really sought after tree for a lot of mushroom hunters, because a lot of different edible mushrooms grow off oak trees. So some of the common ones are oysters, chicken of the woods, and hen of the woods. So those are the really easy to identify, the ones that you should probably start with if you are unsure of your mushroom identification skills. There's not a lot of lookalikes, and you can usually tell that they're what they are because of what they're growing on, which is mostly these big oak trees, which are really highly sought after for mushroom hunting. Alright, so after walking about 15 meters in the woods, we found our first mushroom. So this is the Scarlet Cut mushroom. This is one of the first ones that come up in springtime. It's really common. It's found mostly as like along trails, so you can find it not really going off the trail very far. Like I said, we walked about 15 meters and found some really big ones. We call them Scarlet Cups. So they grow on buried wood usually. So I just dug this up from the ground. You can find them, there's some big ones up in here. So here's some couple big ones. So they can grow pretty large. And they're sometimes cool if you can get them to sporulate, but these are pretty old for that. Their distinguishing characteristics though, right? So there's this, they're bright red. Nothing really looks like this except for the Scarlet Cup. They have that cup-shaped form, which is different than most fungi. So most fungi, right, have the stem and then gills. This one actually is like a cup fungus where the spores are actually coming from the inside of it versus the underside like most mushrooms that we think of. Alright, so we have here these polypores on trees, so these are pretty sturdy. I'm not going to take them off. And then there's one up there, so this is a hardwood of some sort. I'm not actually sure what kind of tree this is, but Yeah, this is a polypore, like I said. So the difference, so we ran into a cup fungus. This is a polypore, and then we also have gilled mushrooms. So this is a mushroom that doesn't have any gills on the underside. It actually has pores. So there are some edible species that have pores, but this is not an edible species, but just some common differences in identification. So pores versus gills versus a cup fungus, those are all things that you're going to want to know when you go out into the woods and start identifying mushrooms for yourself, whether it's for edibility or for just common identification purposes. Another polypore. So these are really common right now. Once things start to green up, you're going to find a lot more gilled mushrooms. But right now it's going to be those hardier, kind of overwintering mushrooms that are really common. So this is Polypore batis, because it has this like really nice colored cap to it, and then it has this really dark stem to it. So again, this is identifiable due to the pores on the underside versus gills. Again, something that you want to look for when you're identifying mushrooms. It's also really pretty big. Not edible, but still pretty to look at. Okay, so we've come across our next mushroom, which is also a polypore, which has those pores on the underside. This is the artist conch, also known as Ganoderma appellatum. It's a perennial mushroom that is really common in the Driftless region. You find it pretty much all year, grows, comes back every year. So like as you can see for this one, that white side is that new growth that just occurred, and then underneath here is that old growth that was probably from years past. This is a commonly sought after mushroom just because you can draw on it, and artists like to collect them to draw stuff on them. So I'm drawing stuff, a little heart and a high, and people collect them to make art and stuff. It's really cool. For sustainability purposes, right, you only want to collect what you're going to be using. So like I said, these are perennial. They grow back every year. They can be pretty big, so I found ones that are like this big. So I always keep the bigger ones just because they're super cool. The littler ones you can pick though. But yeah, just again, keep in mind sustainability, and mushrooms need to be sustainable too. So yeah. Alright, so these are the more examples of that artist conch. So these are a little bit bigger than the ones that I showed you before. They're growing on this dead hardwood, and they're all newer because they have that white undersurface to them. Another really pretty polypore mushroom that is growing right now. It is the cinnamon polypore, which you can see underneath. It's this really, really pretty dark not burgundy, but like a rusty orange color. Has that really pretty top, but then underneath is really vibrant and very pretty. Alright, so this is a mushroom, again a pored mushroom, and what they look like when you pull them kind of apart, and it's really interesting. There's these big long like pored tubes. You can see they're just each individually have like these big long tubes, and that's what makes up those pores. Alright, so this is a different type of pored mushroom, and one of the things when you're looking at polypored mushrooms is the differences in pore size, pore length, and stuff like that. So this one you can see much smaller pore sizes, pore length than the previous polypore mushroom that we were just looking at. Alright, so we ran into our first gilled mushroom of the day. Not quite sure what these are. We refer to these as the LBMs, the little brown mushrooms, which are usually a little harder to identify, but still cute and fun to look at. So these are the mushrooms that we're talking about right now. So this is the stem. We refer to this as the stem. This would be the underside or the gills that I've been referring to, and then we have the top side of the caps. When you're taking pictures of mushrooms, wanting or like posting them on places like iNaturalist or on Facebook, there's like Wisconsin mushroom pages that you can go onto and post mushrooms, and there will be professional people on there that can identify mushrooms for you. But when you're taking mushroom pictures, you want to make sure that you're getting all sides of the mushroom. So you want to make sure that you get both the underside and the top side. So if you're identifying mushrooms, you don't want to just look at this because you want to know what's going on underneath the mushrooms as well. This stick is actually kind of cool too, right? Because this white stuff here, this is the mycelium of the mushroom. So mushrooms, basically when they fruit like this, we call this the fruiting body, and this is just a little part of the mushroom. So mostly the mushroom mass is underneath the woods or in logs or underneath the soil, and that is the mycelium. So that's actually what's digesting woods, decomposing stuff, is the mycelium that is running through everything. So that is a really cool picture of the mycelium. Okay, so these are those rhizome morphs that I was talking about before. So these are just a highly specialized form of mushroom root, or mycelium, and they're for overwintering. They're a little hardier growing up the tree. They're mostly associated with honey mushrooms or armillaria that grow in the fall. So if you're hunting honey mushrooms and you see them and you're unsure of if they're honey mushrooms or not, you can also look for these rhizome morphs, which are usually growing up alongside the trees. Alright, so then this next tree, we have this vine which has crust fungus on it. So we've talked about polypores, guild mushrooms, cut mushrooms, and then we also have crust mushrooms. So these grow really close to the bark on the trees, but they peel off and they look very different than what the actual bark of the tree looks like. We call these crust fungus because they grow like a crust on the tree. Then there's two different kinds right here. So we have this white colored one, and then we have this like orange red colored one. So that's like a just different type of way that mushrooms can grow on trees. So we came to another guild mushroom. This is Phyllothopsis nigulans, which is also known as the mock oyster. Oyster mushrooms are edible. These are not edible. So when you're identifying oysters, you want to make sure that they're all white. They have the white spore print, white underside, white top side. So these have the white top side, but they're very orange. They have that very vibrant color on the underside. Yeah, they're growing up alongside the trees. So this is how, similar to how oysters grow in clusters, but they're not oysters, so they're beautiful. Alright, so we've run across our next mushroom. This is a really common mushroom here in the Driftless region. It is the Splitkilled Mushroom, or otherwise known as Schizophyllum commune. It has characteristics about it to identify it. It has the split gills on the underside, which might be a little hard to see. It's really gray in color. It grows in kind of these like clustery formations on sticks. It's also common on trees. It's just like a really common species. One interesting fact though about Schizophyllum is it has over 28,000 different sexes. So mushrooms have different sexes more than humans. So this one has actually over 28,000, which is really interesting. Some people use it in teas and stuff. I've never done that, but you can definitely do that if you want to. Alright, so we've come across this log. One of the common mushrooms that people collect for tinctures, making teas, is the turkey tail mushroom. So there is a lookalike for turkey tail, which is Cerium austria, and that is what we found here. So this top side looks exactly like turkey tail, but the one way to tell them apart is through the underside. So you can see here the underside is really smooth, doesn't have any pores on it. So this is actually a crust fungus that grows along the sides or along like the bark, tree, root, stick, whatever you're looking at. And turkey tail grows the exact same way. It has that very similar top pattern to it, but the underside is going to actually have those pores on the underside. So these are not edible. They're not going to kill you, but they're not that prized turkey tail that people look for. But there's two ways that mushrooms can decompose wood. So wood is mostly made up of cellulose and lignin. Lignin is this brown coloration which is left behind by brown rot fungus. So they decompose all the cellulose in the trees, and then they leave behind all the lignin. And then we also have the white rot fungus, which is the opposite. It leaves behind this white cellulose and it decomposes the brown lignin. So the way that you can tell these apart is these will break apart in chunks, so like square chunks in the brown rot, and then the white rot breaks apart in like long white like strips. So those are like two ways that mushrooms ecologically decompose the woods around us. Alright, so this blue that you see here along this cut wood is Clara Seborrhea, and it creates this really bluish hue to the wood that is usually freshly cut. You see it really commonly around here on downed logs, and it just creates this very interesting blue coloration, and sometimes it has fruiting bodies, but mostly it just exists in this very blue-like form that is created from the mycelium. Okay, so these are mushrooms that we don't know what they are, so these are really good ones to take home for at-home identification. So if you don't know what they are, you can't find them in your field guide, it's a good idea to collect them and then bring them home for further identification. So when you're collecting mushrooms, again, you want a little bit of a pocket knife to kind of dig them out. So what you're going to do is kind of clean them out and then dig like underneath it. So you want to dig them out and kind of get that undersurface of what they're growing on. So you're going to want to put that in a little bag, bring it home, and what you're going to want to do is collect more than one. So you can see here that these are actually growing on buried wood. So that would be something that you would want to bring home as well. So this one I didn't get all the wood from, and then this one I did. So you want to collect multiple different stages. So here's a little one, big one, and then I have like that medium one that I just picked as well. So those are all good things that you want to bring home for identification. So when you're hunting for mushrooms, you want to make sure that you're hunting on public land, or you know the person that you're hunting, like the person's private property that you're hunting on. I know there's been some, like Cooley Experimental is a really good place, Hickson Forest is a really great place. You just want like big places that are very public. There's apps that you can download to get those. You can go on different places on like Facebook. They'll post like public places to go. You can also look at the DNR website. So Cooley Experimental is actually DNR own site that is really big. It goes all the way to like Sparta or something crazy. And you just want to know like where you're hunting and kind of how to hunt. So I know like a lot of people like to hunt for morel mushrooms, and how I always viewed it was take what you need, not like collecting everything that you possibly see. I know some people collect mushrooms to sell. You can totally do that. But yeah, if you're only collecting for yourself, just take what you need and leave whatever left for other people to enjoy as well. Okay, so if you're wanting to start identifying mushrooms at home, I would suggest purchasing guidebooks. There's online keys that you can use to get started with your identification. So some of the things that I recommend are having a field guide for Wisconsin trees. So again, learning the habitat that these mushrooms are growing in is a great way to identify mushrooms right away. So knowing the trees that you're picking from or around is really good, and to have a little pocket guide for that is also important. If you want to start collecting mushrooms too, I would also suggest taking a little field notebook with you, writing down notes of where you're collecting these mushrooms, what they look like when they're fresh, so you can go home and if they change from the time that you collect them to the time that you're bringing them home to identify, you'll want to make sure that you have those notes with you. A really good mushroom book that I would suggest is The Mushrooms of the Midwest. This has really beautiful pictures in it, and it's a really commonly used. I really like it just because the pictures are really nice. I think it was like $30 or so at Barnes & Noble. It's a really great book. This would be the one that I suggest for at-home purposes. There's also field guides that fit in pockets for mushrooms. So The Mushrooms of the Upper Midwest, which is a really good pocket guide that I have too. I just don't have that with me. But it's also a great pocketbook to carry around when you're in the woods. Okay, so I know a lot of you are probably interested in mushroom cultivation. So I don't have a lot of examples for this, and if you're just starting cultivation, I would suggest purchasing like grow bags or doing like at-home log kits, just because it's probably the easiest foolproof way to start. One of the things that's really common to mess up right away through mushroom cultivation is not having pure cultures. So if you don't have like the proper equipment, like pressure cooker, a way to sterilize your substrates. It can get kind of messy and you won't have great results right away. So what I would suggest doing if you're just starting out growing mushrooms from scratch or at home is purchasing a grow bag. So this is an example of a grow bag. You can see this white coloration is what you're gonna want to have for all grow bags, but if you're purchasing them, they're gonna be white, ready to go for you at home. So what you do with these, basically, it started from a pure culture, which we started in the lab about probably 2 months ago. So it's about a couple weeks long process, 6 to 8 weeks is probably how long the process lasts. You want to have a pure culture, that's the first thing that you start with, and then you inoculate that culture into something with more surface area. So we started with a rye grain, but that can go, I don't know what I'm trying to say. That can like, there's multiple different substrates that you can use. But rye grain is probably the easiest one we have found most productive. And then this is also, and then from that rye grain, we inoculated straw. So we just collected this from a local farmer. She just gave us an extra couple bales of hay. And then we pasteurized the hay using like basically a big pressure cooker in the lab. And then this is oyster mushrooms. So oyster mushrooms are usually the easiest ones to start with. There's not a lot of contamination that happens. They fruit pretty readily. They're really easy to grow. And yeah, in a couple days I'll probably open up this bag and hopefully get some fruiting to happen. But yeah, you want that big white mycelium mass in there for those. For logs, this is a log that I inoculated a couple years ago. I left it outside so some of the holes are empty because the squirrels got to them. So what you do is you basically drill holes in logs and then fill these with a plug spawn, which you can buy on forestfungi.net or any other fungal service. And then you just basically inoculate the wood with those wooden dowels and then cover with beeswax is how I did it. So yeah, those are a couple ways you can start to cultivate mushrooms.